I call to order the Town of Hilton Head Island Finance and Administrative Committee meeting of January 19th, 2021. Zendaya, have we complied with the Freedom of Information Act?
Yes, sir, we have.
Zendaya, would you call the roll? Committee members, please reply with present or here when called upon.
Mr. Harkins,
Here.
Mr. Stanford,
Here.
Mr. Brown,
Here.
and Mr. Lennox.
Here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Zendaya, does staff have any changes to the agenda presented?
No, sir, we do not have any changes at this time.
Thank you. Committee, may I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Any members, if you have any changes to the agenda, please note them when called upon by Zendaya. Otherwise, please reply yes or no to approve the agenda as presented. Zendaya, please call the roll.
Mr. Harkins,
Yes.
Mr. Stanford,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Approve.
Mr. Lennox.
Yes. We have two sets of minutes to review and approve. Special meeting, October 8th, 2020, and a subsequent special meeting, November 17, 2020. Committee members, do you have any changes to the minutes presented? If there are none, may I have a motion to approve the meeting minutes of October 6th and November 17th, 2020?
So moved.
Second.
Zendaya, please call the roll.
Mr. Harkins,
Yes.
Mr. Stanford,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
I will abstain. These meetings were taking place before I was seated.
that is correct. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Lennox.
Yes. Thank you. Zendaya, do we have any citizen comments?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, public comments concerning today's agenda items were to be submitted electronically via the town's open town hall portal. The public comment period closed today at noon. At the conclusion of the open town hall, there were no comments. However, one citizen did sign up to speak before the committee today. Mr. Chairman, at this time, the caller is holding.
Thank you. For the record, would all callers please state their full legal name and their address of record? We'll take the callers in the order in which they are selected. Zendaya, the first caller, please.
Mr. Hoagland?
Yes. Skip Hoagland? Yes, Skip Hoagland, Windmill Harbor. You are not in compliance of FOIA. Mr. Ames and Banker Lennox, can you answer the following questions for me today, or do you prefer to wait for your coming depositions? Why did you scheme and allow illegal chamber DMO contract with crooked lawyers Curtis Coltrane, Terry Finger, Walter Nestor, and David Tigas to keep allowing Bill Miles to keep illegally using millions of ATAX funds as his secret sauce with zero full accounting of what he's doing with all the money? Banker Lennox, you claimed you went to the chamber offices to see accounting and receipts for the ATAX expenditures. Is this correct? And you claimed it looked all okay and honest, and you did this in a 1-hour inspection. Is this true, Mr. Lennox? If ATAX funds paid for the DMO app and website, with over $1 million in ATAX funds taken to Canada, stiffing our country and our local businesses, how is it possible that Bill Miles can claim he owns this DMO communication media product versus the town? What happens to this DMO app and website when a new DMO is hired, Mr. Lennox and Mr. Ames? Mr. Ames and Mr. Lennox, under ATAX laws and South Carolina constitutional laws, do you think this DMO contract you signed for 5 years with Bill Miles is legal and valid. Fact is, you both know it was illegal, as well as the crooked lawyers who schemed this with you. Fact is, you can't issue ATAX funds to be illegally used by Bill Miles for his private profit that does not benefit the public good, reason, use at all. And you can't use ATAX funds to profit and pay no IRS UBIT taxes under IRS 501-C6 nonprofit tax codes. ATAX laws state ATAX funds issued to a DMO must only be used by the hired DMO to promote and market the destination, not to profit his pockets. Where does it say that the hired DMO, nonprofit chamber, and Bill Miles and the CVB DMO can upsell advertising on the DMO app and website and pocket all the profits and violate IRS tax codes and laws? Where does it state that? You really think all you shysters are going to get away with this? This is a tax heist, and you're behind it, and you need to pay for it. I look forward to your depositions that we've been preparing for over 5 years. And as far as I'm concerned, what you've done, you should be handcuffed and drug out of that building. Thank you very much.
That was pleasant. We have no unfinished business, committee. We have 2 items of new business. John Scheuer, Director of Finance, will update us on town finances through the first 2 fiscal quarters ending December 31st, 2020. John, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to share my screen, and certainly feel free to ask any questions as we go. This is the first 6 months. We're not quite finished with closing, but almost all of our entries are in here, and I think it still gives you a pretty good picture of where we are 6 months in. Year-to-date collections, we start with revenue. We took a handful of representative revenue items from TIF to local aid tax, state aid tax, and all the way down. And our first 6 months, as we've been showing, 26% more than last year, which is really unusually good. Some of the leaders in this was a super high and unusual real estate activity. The real estate transfer fee is almost 100% up over last year. Of course,
May I interrupt you?
Yes.
Excuse me, John. Are you able to increase the size a little bit?
Let's see what I can do.
There you go.
John, on the real estate tax transfer fee, have you been able to determine what percent that represents in terms of new entrants to our market as opposed to internal flipping?
From what we can tell, most of it is internal flipping. And so we have some of it is related to just more transactions, and some of it is related to higher prices, and they work together towards that.
I'm surprised with that answer because I, without any data, I was just guessing that we may have an unusual increase in people out of state coming here.
I think that is the case. Yes, I think there's been a number of people who have started to work remote, and they have figured out that if I'm going to work remote, I can work from Hilton Head Island.
Okay, thank you.
The hospitality tax, I think I'd like to point that one out, and it's based on prepared food and beverages. And so this is your restaurant industry, down 1%. Earlier in the pandemic, when the pandemic first started, the HTAX was down 30%, and then 15%, and then later 6%. And so for the first 6 months, we can celebrate that it's only down 1% compared to where we were before. But it's also something to keep an eye on because it's not where it used to be. Beach preservation fee, up 30%. I think what we can talk about is that our tourist season really extended well beyond the normal tourist season, and that's indicative in our local aid tax. It's also indicative of our beach preservation fee. The jury is still out on how this will affect the rest of the year, though. And so, okay, we can be glad that this far we're in this good a shape, but okay, what does that mean for the rest of the year? And we'll want to keep a close eye on that. You look at stormwater down 71%. That's really related to, and the county does the billing and the collections for us. And so as the county had to work through its issues on the property tax billing, there were very little collections for us to consider, and we expect that to pick up back in January and February. And so don't panic over that stormwater. Stormwater has been one of our most consistent revenues, but you take this moment in time, December 31st, and it shows substantially less. I would also like to direct your attention to business licenses, and you can see that we're, of our collections, $1.5 million compared to 262,000. We're $1.3 million better. $1 million of that is really related to a state payment that was the state afforded business license payees to the state extra time at June 30th in order to make their payments, and that subsequent payment from the state to us came outside of our window of availability for us to be able to count that as year end. And so that really pushed $1 million of collections from 2020 fiscal year to 2021 fiscal year. So that's the reason why we're up $1 million. But even without that million, it's got a strong start. And the caveat with that is our major business license collections are coming up here in March, April, May, and June. And so we hope this trend continues, but we certainly think that it's going to moderate, and it won't be that good. Those are some of the highlights, and certainly you can read the rest. You take away a couple of the biggest ones in business license and real estate transfer, and that 26% increase is 10.8. And if that were the only data point that we had, a 10.8 for 6 months, we'd be really pleased. And so that's unusual, and we certainly attribute that to our extended busy season, and we'll see where the rest of the year takes us. Here's just a picture of our 2019 business license income by month, and you can see the seasonality of that. And so if we have a really high percentage increase for the first 6 months, that's really when we have really low collections of business licenses. And so the meat of our collection year happens in the second 6 months, and that's when we'd like to have those increases continue. But I think what we are going to see is that those increases will moderate. General fund revenues, and this is 2021, that's we're in fiscal year 2021 right now, compared to the last 2 years. And we've shown strong general fund collections every single month. The only month that we didn't beat 2019 was November, but we were awful close to the November collections, and each individual month was more than the prior 2 years. So that's it. We're kicking off our revenues to a great start. But also keep in mind that this is our lower period of collections, and our more substantial collections are in the early spring and early summer. If you take the year-to-date numbers, you can see, okay, well, let's put all the dates together. And of course, the 21 is the more blue compared to the yellow 2020 and the gray 2019. But still, we got a great start to the year. How does that fit in with the rest of the year? And I think this is an important slide, because what it does is it shows that, yes, although we're still beating the first 2 years or still beating the last 2 years, we have substantial collections in January, substantial collections in February, and substantial collections in June in order to really make our budget. And so, yes, this is a great start, but yes, there's a good ways to go yet too. But so far, so good. How does all this compare with last year? We put our year-to-date numbers in, and our year-to-date collections of this same group of revenues, 23 million compared to 67.8 million of all of last year, and so we're at 34%. And just for, we can run right through our TIF money. We've only collected 1% of what we did last year, and so we don't want to draw too many conclusions from that because we still have 98+% to go. Local aid tax. Here we are halfway through the year and we're 62% collected. That's a strong start. We hope that trend continues. State aid tax. Halfway through the year, we're 56% collected. We're happy about that. Real estate transfer fee. We've already beat last year. That's tremendous. We'll want to keep in mind what things real estate transfer fee is allowed to use for, because it's kind of a narrow purpose, but I think that's a real strong measure of our economy also. Age tax, we're 44% collected of last year, and so we hope that as the vaccinations get out and people can kind of go back toward normal, then our restaurant business will be more back to normal, and that will be key to getting our age tax back to where we would like it to be, back to where we would all like it to be. And it is most certainly our restaurant industry is a key component of our economy. And so we'd like that number to be higher, but with a strong spring, that can help make it out. And obviously the COVID response is going to be key to that. Franchise fee, you can see that's we're a little bit under. Some of that's seasonal, some of that's weather related, and so we'll keep an eye on that. But it's electric franchise fees is usually pretty stable. Property taxes, we can talk a little bit about that, and it's later in the presentation. In essence, our friends at the county have had a number of discussions about how to proceed with their property taxes this year. Ours are included with that as part of the county billing, and so the county has gotten approval from the state to extend the due date for property taxes, and so that means they collect it on our behalf, and then after they collect it, balance it, and then they distribute it back to us. With that extension at the county level, our collections for property taxes are going to be later than last year. And so we are 10% into the new year, 90% to go. And so some of these indicators about our property tax collections, you look at January, it's probably going to be less than last year because of the extension that was allowed to taxpayers. And then we should start to catch that up in February and in March. And so that's a number we'll want to keep a close eye on. EMS revenues, we're halfway through the year and we're at 60%. And part of that is activity and part of that is collection activity. And so both of those are working together to have a real strong start to this year. Permits right on the money for halfway through the year. And so if you look at last year to date, our number was 27% through December 31st of eventual collections. This 34% is a strong indicator or an indicator of a strong start. Just another visual of where 34% collected, and so it's a good start. General fund expenses, you can see some of the seasonality of the last 2 years. Some of that is due to the timing of the expenses, like our insurance premium. Some of that is due to the timing of payroll, and some of that is due to the timing of the year. You can take, like a lot of the landscaping happens in the springtime. And so we've got a little bit of seasonality, but it matches a lot year to year, that seasonality. And this is a picture of the last 2 years. How do we do in the first 6 months? July, August, September, October, through November, very, very comparable to the year before. December is an outlier. December, the normal payroll would have fallen on January 1st, which is a holiday, and so we have an extra payroll in December. And so it's recorded through December 31st, and so that's why it looks much bigger than the other numbers do. But I think what you're going to see is as we proceed through the year, that will moderate and level out, and where the previous 2 years had 3 administrative payrolls in a month, and then we would just have 2, and those things will offset as we go. But it's our normal administrative payroll schedule is 26 pay periods per year, and that means 2 months out of each year has a 3 pay period cycle to it. And December for 2021 was a 3 pay period cycle, while 2020 and 2019 were only 2. And so we look at that and note that it's up, but I don't think that trend is going to continue to be much more like previous years. Look and see just differences. Last year, January was a 3 pay period time frame for 2020, and it was a 3 pay period time frame in 2019. And so I think to put this out in 12 months, and we'll have a much more comparable number as the fiscal year progresses. Year-to-date spending, our numbers are very, very comparable to the previous year. We're just a little bit more than 3% more than our 2020 year-to-date, and with the implementation of our compensation plan, that would be a very predictable number, and I think that's a trend that's going to continue for the rest of the year. How does this compare with the rest of the year if you project out? And you can see the trends are right on line. Year-to-date trends are right on line with the last 2 years. Spending, you got a little bit of a mixed bag on the spending category. You look at town council is up. One of the things that town council has this year that they did not have last year is the parking study. And so you take the parking study out and our numbers are almost identical to last year. Some of this is related to some bills that there's a little differences in bills between one year and the next, and occasional open positions. And so none of this would jump out at me as unusual. And I think at a 3.3% increase over last year for year-to-date is reasonable and expected. And I don't see anything else that jumps out as, oh, we're going to have a budgetary issue. I don't think so. Another way to look, sorry, I apologize for skipping ahead, but another way to look at spending, the last slide was year-to-date compared to last year-to-date. This slide is year-to-date compared to our budget. And 50% through the year, we are 43% spent through our approved budget. And so one of the things that you'll find is that generally in our December numbers, our monthly numbers that we would report, we're generally on a cash basis. And then when we get to June 30th, we convert that to an accrual basis. And so there's a little bit of a lag. There's a difference between the cash and accrual basis, and we'll catch that up. And so our cash spending through December 31st is 43%. Our accrual spending is going to be a little bit higher than that, but certainly below 50%, where we would expect to be at halfway through the year. So from a budgetary compliance standpoint, this number should give you comfort that we're operating within budget across the board. Do the math and say, okay, our revenues minus our spending. This is a normal pattern for the last 2 years. We have to draw from reserves from July through January until our property taxes come in, and then once our larger two. We have two large collection months, January and February, and this year it may be February and March for property taxes. Then that turns our numbers from a year-to-date deficit to a year-to-date surplus, and you can see the last 2 years we did report a surplus. 2020 was a smaller surplus than 2019, but if you were to look at our December numbers, you can see numbers in the range of about $8 million temporary use of reserves in December, and by the end of the year, with good collections and strongholds on spending, we end up with a small surplus, and that's what the last 2 years looked like. How does this year compare to those last 2 years? You can see in the green, our temporary use of reserves is less than either of those two, and it's been consistent through the first 6 months. How does that look year to date? Our net numbers, I switched it from a bar graph to a line graph, but it tells the same information. This is a cumulative number through December. The blue being 2021, we have less of a use of a reserve than either of the last 2 years. But we also look to January and February to see that temporary use of reserves turn around with our collection of property taxes. And so you'll see a lot of dynamics here in the next 3 months, and we'll want to watch those closely. But to answer the question, well, how are we doing right now? Our revenues in the general fund are 24% up. That's going to moderate as the rest of the year progresses. It won't be up that much at the end of the year, but we've got a really strong start. Spending is up 3.3%, and so our net use of reserves temporarily is 19.5% better than last year. Just another debt savings, and we're glad to report last week the town sold $5.6 million of stormwater bonds with an interest rate of less than 1% to replace bonds that had a 2.78%. So after costs, savings were over $156,000. So we're happy about that, and that was a follow-up to our GO bonds that we issued for savings in October of $1.1 million savings. And so those are our two bond issues that we had scheduled for this year that town council has approved for us to go forward. And the sole purpose of both of those bonds was only for savings and no new spending on those. Property taxes, just reiterating, the county has received permission from the state to extend the deadline, and so we'll want to keep a close eye on how that goes for the rest of the year. The issues, these are the same as we've been reporting. We've kept a close eye on spending. We've kept a close eye on revenues and our numbers. I think item number 3, so far so good. The measures seem to be working. And item number 4, another month with positive trends. And so we can continue to report that. I'm happy to report that. And item number 5, is certainly always in our back pocket. We can adjust where we need to. And so that continues to be the same story. Issues, revenues most at risk were tourist related. And so you saw HTAX is the one that has been most affected so far through the COVID. And it's primarily used for capital. And so we will certainly want to keep an eye on that, and that will affect how we plan for in the future, and that's going to be a consideration as we start to think about starting the budget process for the new year. Number 6, I would point to again. It's not new; it's the same story, but special revenue fund balances carry the day because town council has been so forward thinking in developing and maintaining those reserves that enable us to weather this COVID storm so far better than many jurisdictions. And so we've had a number of conversations with our bond raters, including Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and Fitch's, and they've been quite impressed with our reserves that are set aside and our ability to manage through this COVID. And so we went through the ratings process with our GO in the fall, and we had kind of a mini rating process with the different bank bidders here just this past week. And so they delved into our finances in great detail, and that translated into better interest rates and translated into savings for the town because the fund balances and the operational measures to make sure that we stayed in the black were so successful. So kudos to town council, kudos to town management about being able to stay in the black. For more information, we'll continue to put up our monthly financials. Our December financials are almost finished, so we should have those this week, and we'll put some more detail in there. And we always would suggest to look at the annual report, and we are certainly available for any comments or questions. And it's good to kind of have this information as we start to think about starting to prepare for the budget for the new year. So I would, Mr. Chairman, pause at this moment and open it up for questions.
Thank you, John. Committee, what questions or comments do you have? Yes, Glenn.
Thank you. First of all, John, I am very impressed with your report, as I am every time we have one of these meetings. It gives us a clear understanding of what's going on with finances, and I want to tell you that I appreciate that. Then I want to comment that being able to do financing at less than 1% is somehow incredible, and I'll give you all the credit for that, John. The market has been is very strange in that regard. But I guess my question is, I see that the H tax has taken the biggest hit as a result of the pandemic. Anticipating revenue losses there, and in other funds, we stopped any new CIP projects. And I'm wondering what our thinking should be moving forward, having to do with many needed CIPs around the island. I don't have a specific recommendation in mind. I just wanted to try to stimulate that discussion. Thank you.
Yes, and I think town council, we will get an opportunity to talk about that. And I think as we look ahead to town council's retreat and starting to have those conversations about priorities of town council, then we can start to talk about what's the best timing. And I think we get a sense of, okay, we need to continue to grow and do projects to continue to improve the town where we can and where we can afford it. And so we want to do those projects and we want to move those things forward, but we want to move those forward prudently. And so I think this year is going to be a good year to do a priority list. Let's get the town council together and start to put things together. What are the kind of projects that the town council would like to see, and what is the order that town council would like to see those in, and then start to sequence those into a prudent way that we would be able to move some of these forward, because there's design, there's planning, there's engineering, and a lot of those things can be worked upon while we're waiting for the COVID to be less of a risk. And so I think this year will be a really opportunistic year for town council to make priorities, start some plans, and we can move these things, or at least get these things started to when we're more comfortable with the revenues, then we're ready to go full speed ahead on the projects. I hope that answers your question.
I think it does, John. I think what you're saying is this should be certainly a subject for the workshop that's coming up here in a couple of weeks for a detailed discussion among all of us. And I think that's a good plan. Thank you.
Bill.
Is there a story behind the EMS revenue increase Is it related to more transports dealing with COVID? Do you have any backup information on that?
I think the primary reason for the increase in the EMS is the extension of the tourist season. And so, as you saw, our tourism season extended well past September and into October and some into November. The EMS business stayed up as tourist season extended. And so it's the number of trips.
Okay. Thank you.
Alex, anything to add?
Yeah, I concur with the statements of job well done by John and his staff. Just a couple of questions. The property tax extension, the date on your slide show here indicates February 15th. Is that correct, John, or is it the end of March?
At one point in time, it was February the 15th, and county council may have gone beyond that since then. And so,
John, I believe they have. I believe it's in March.
okay. And so, thank you for pointing that out. And that was from earlier information. And thank you for the update.
Okay, and I guess my other question is not necessarily related to your presentation here today, but you did mention it briefly, and that's the salaries for town staff. And reading the minutes from the last two meetings, I understand that there was a hold put on the, I guess, merit increases, some of which were a byproduct of the study that was done to get our pay rates in line so that we are competitive. Is there any change in that at the moment, John?
The merit raises and the compensation, both pieces of that, they happened at different times. Both pieces have been implemented.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Good. John has presented the general fund only. When we receive the more detailed financial statements that John mentioned were almost completed, what we'll see there will be not only the general fund, but we'll see all governmental funds. And one of John's late slides showed all government funds revenue being closer to 80 million than the amount that John's showing us here in the general fund. I think that hospitality tax numbers is one that we really have to closely watch. Although they have been significantly impacted by COVID, our hospitality tax being down only 1% would lead you to believe that food and beverage revenue island-wide is down about that much too. One of the things, John, that we've talked about in the past, and I think it would be very interesting to know, would be not only how many new businesses are opening vis-a-vis the new business licenses issued, but how many business licenses we have in force right now, and what the fallout is. We really don't have much of a way of determining how many closures there are. I doubt whether a business calls you and asks for a refund of their unused business license fee. I think if they close, they just leave everything unattended to, and that being one. But if it would be possible, and we really wanted to determine the state of the island's economy to include food and beverage, it would be really, I think, valuable to know how many closures we're having monthly, quarterly, annually, and this would be the year to do it. And maybe the right person or the right group to ask would be the chamber versus you.
Sure. We do have some statistics, and we'll pull those for business license new applications and business license closures. Sometimes we are lagging indicators because sometimes we are the last to know. But we do know, and you'd be surprised that we would get a number of requests for people who have prepaid their business license and as they close look for a refund, and we have done those
Okay.
COVID related.
Okay.
So, but we'll put that on the list. And to your point about all governmental funds, what I'm trying to present is to give you a representative feel for our overall picture. But I'm doing this without the benefit of our monthly statements being completed. And so I'm pulling these numbers without the financial statements, and it's just a presentation that I can just do and in a way to get this information as early as possible to you.
Yeah, it works, John. I think, is it safe to say the trend you're seeing in general fund revenue is parallel to all government fund revenue?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah. I think general fund is representative of the other, but they each have their own story.
Two more things. I think what we're seeing this year, and hopefully we never see it again, is the effect of timing on the revenue stream. The timing is off in business license fee revenue because the state allowed a hiatus, if you will, into July, which leaped our June 30th, 2020 fiscal close. And likewise, property tax collections have been pushed into March, as Alex mentioned. So rather than have that bubble come through in December, January, and early February, it's now going to be pushed out another 60 days.
And one thing I would like to note on that one moment, and thank you, Councilman Brown, for pointing that out, is that if the county has a deadline of the end of March, then those collections, they'll continue to take things that are postmarked in March, received in April, then they go through and balance, and then they further balance TIF monies, and then it can be 30 days or more before we get our payments from the county. And so with the end of March time frame, it will spill into April, and it could very well spill into May.
Last thing I would say is the real estate transfer fees. My hope is this is a trend that will hold strong because activity is up and so are prices. And the discussions that we've had in the past 2 or 3 years or more has been activity up, prices not. So I think we can take the idea that prices are not following activity and perhaps sit it on the sideline for a while. And Bill, you asked a good question about the mix between people flipping properties on the island versus new buyers coming on the island. It may be beneficial for us to get a hold of Jean Beck and ask her to join us at one of our F&A committee meetings and kind of preface it by saying we've seen a significant spike in revenue coming from these transfer fees, Jean. And we would be really interested to know if you think this is sustainable or not, because we're going to very, very shortly be in the process of developing a 2022 budget. And if this is something that is sustainable, I think we can reflect that in the 22 budget.
Mm-hmm. Good point. And I think Jean Beck probably is our best source.
John, does that make sense?
It does. We'd love to hear her input.
Okay. Anything else? Yes. Sure, David.
Thanks. I'd like to piggyback on that last topic. We have had an in-migration, a substantial in-migration over the last 9 months. Those people made quick decisions to relocate. And I'm suggesting that Many of them made a decision without as much knowledge about what Hilton Head represents, what it stands for, and therefore may be coming onto the island with a mindset that may or may not be consistent with what we consider our core values. I don't want to belabor this. I just want to raise the subject for us to think about. It behooves us to have an ongoing educational program through the chamber, through the realtors, and through our own website that highlights those things that are important to us as a community and the things that we want people to adhere to and appreciate when they relocate to the island. Thank you.
Said. Anything else for John? Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Mr. Chair.
New business item B, a proposed Broad Creek PSD ASR facility on the town's Greenwood track. Nicole Dixon.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Nicole Dixon for the record. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to show a map of the proposed location. Can you all see the map up on the screen?
Mm-hmm.
Yes? Okay. I'll first start with saying that at the November meeting of the Intergovernmental Committee, there was discussions with the 3 public service districts about their long-term capacity needs and potential requests to utilize town property to accommodate these needs. The request before you from the Broad Creek PSD to utilize town land for an aquifer storage and recovery facility is the first request we've received since those discussions. I believe at the November meeting, no real direction or action took place. So the Broad Creek Public Service District is proposing to purchase or lease a portion of the town property adjacent to Fire Station 6, up on your screen, known as the Greenwood Tract, for this aquifer storage and recovery facility. The facility will allow the PSD to store water in a well in an aquifer during times when the water is available and allow recovery of the stored water from that same well when needed. This water will be utilized should the PSD's wells become intruded with salt water. The PSD had a water supply study done, and the result of that study was the recognition that saltwater intrusion would occur in the wells. After review and discussions of their options, the PSD decided it needed to construct an ASR facility to secure the water supply. As the facility requires a small area near their elevated tank and supply line, the subject town property was identified as an ideal location. The PSD already has an easement over the property to use as spray fields for excess treated effluent water. Now, there are restrictive covenants on the property. The covenants prohibit a major or minor utility on the property. But while the use is restricted, the PSD could secure the agreement of Greenwood Communities and Resorts, Inc. to allow the use, and then the town could also agree with it. This can be done in a number of ways. There could be an amendment to the restrictive covenants, or Greenwood could provide written documentation that states the proposed facility does not violate any of the restrictions in the deed. But staff recommends the committee support the proposal and allow staff to prepare an agreement with the following conditions. Should town council decide to sell the land rather than lease a portion of the land for the proposed project, request a right of first refusal on any future exchange of the property. The second condition that staff recommends is to maintain an adequate buffer along US 278. Staff feels a 100-foot buffer would be sufficient. The third condition would be to prohibit access to the facility from 278. The fourth condition would be the facility be located outside of the spray field easement area. And then the fifth condition would just be to support the efforts to secure an agreement from Greenwood and Resorts, Inc. to allow the proposed use on the property. So staff is recommending the support of the committee. I've got Mike Allen, the general manager of the PSD, on the call right now, along with Tom Secord, who is his engineer. And they have a presentation available and ready to present. I don't know if you want to stop and ask me questions or if you want to continue with their presentation and then ask questions after.
And so we have.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. I think you were on mute.
Yes, Nicole, I think with committee's approval, I think having Mike and Tom make their comments would be appropriate. They may, in fact, answer some of the questions that we have.
Okay, great. We'll turn it over to Mike.
Good afternoon, gentlemen and ladies. I appreciate your time. Just to follow up on what Nicole had mentioned, Broad Creek has completed a water supply study back in May of 2020 and moving forward with the recommendation of building or installing a aquifer storage and recovery, aka an ASR well. We have looked at our district and where best to locate this, and this location popped up as being ideal. Currently, there are the other two PSDs on the island. Both have ASRs, and this would just kind of fall in line with that same type of use. This ASR would help us not only meet future demands, but also help give us redundancy if we were to lose a well, not if, but when we lose a well to saltwater intrusion. With that, I will turn it over to Tom Secord, who is with Corello Engineering. He is our engineer moving this project forward.
Thanks, Mike. This is, again, my name, Tom Secord with Corello Engineers. We put this presentation together. Some of it may be information that you already know, but the driver for the project, again, is the fact that the saltwater intrusion is occurring underneath Hilton Head Island. This has been occurring since the 70s, and it's largely the result of excessive overpumping in the area of Savannah. This graphic shows that pre-development, the water use would flow freely from wells in Savannah. But post-development, as Savannah has begun to overpump the groundwater, the water levels have dropped, and as a result, the flows have reversed. They used to flow to freshen Port Royal Sound, and now the water from Port Royal Sound and Calabogie Sound are draining into the aquifer and contaminating the fresh water under Hilton Head Island with salt water. Hilton Head PSD and South Island PSD have already lost their wells, or many of their wells, to saltwater intrusion. Broad Creek PSD will eventually lose all three of their wells to this saltwater intrusion. So how much water is needed? We engaged in a water supply study for Broad Creek and evaluated their water use. 90% of all of Broad Creek's supply comes from the upper Floridan aquifer where this saltwater intrusion is occurring. So there's a lot of water supply to make up as a result of that. The Department of Health and Environmental Control, the state, tells us they have rules about supply development, and you have to have enough water to meet your maximum day flow. And this demand data here says that Broad Creek's maximum day demand is 3.5 million gallons per day. So that's how much supply we need to meet the state's requirements. We looked at multiple supply options, including expanding the use of supply from Beaufort Jasper Water Supply Agency. The remaining 10% of Broad Creek's water is already provided through an intertie with Broad Creek. We looked at treating salty groundwater with reverse osmosis. South Island PSD and Hilton Head PSD already do this. And additionally, we looked at this aquifer storage and recovery alternative, which is a way of storing water during, let's say, the winter months, so that we can provide it back during the summer months. And that just reduces the amount of overall supply development that we need to do, and it can help control the costs for that infrastructure. So we also need, the state requires us to provide storage and pumping to meet peak hour flows and fire flows. And that number brings the peak hour and the fire flow production up to a flow of 9.3 million gallons per day. But that's over a very short window of about 4 hours. So supply and pumping must be reliable. We want to replace the upper Floridan wells that Broad Creek is going to lose to saltwater intrusion before that loss occurs, to make sure that we can meet those peak hour and fire flow requirements. So that would require more dedicated pumping of water from Beaufort Jasper through the Ashmore pump station that is shared with Hilton Head PSD. And then this aquifer storage and recovery well that not only helps with that peak pumping capacity, but it also provides some reliability in the event of an interruption of service from Beaufort Jasper. There is currently one pipeline serving the island that goes under Mackey and Skull Creek. So if that supply were to be interrupted through some sort of damage, this aquifer storage and recovery well could be used as a means to get by until that submarine pipeline could be repaired. So our 2020 water supply alternatives analysis, it concludes that there is new infrastructure required to maintain reliable supply for potable use and for fire protection in Broad Creek service area. The most cost-effective treatment alternative or supply alternative includes buying more water from Beaufort Jasper, plus this aquifer storage and recovery well that we're talking about today. The infrastructure improvements required, we're looking to get away from the single submarine pipeline under Mackey and Skull Creek with probably the bridge replacement project providing a reliability pipeline, so 2 pipelines under the creek instead of 1. Upgrades to the Ashmore pumping station and this new aquifer storage and recovery well. I think you all have heard about aquifer storage and recovery before, but just to give you a refresher, what this involves is storage of water in a well in an aquifer that's suitable during times when that water is available, and then recovery of that stored water from the same aquifer when the water is needed. So basically, you're creating a huge bubble in this aquifer. If you think about ground storage tanks that the utilities have, the elevated storage tank in Broad Creek service area is only about 200,000 gallons. A big tank on the island would probably be about 2 or 3 million gallons. Well, this well could store 100 million gallons. And if you think about just the area that would be required above ground to store 100 million gallons, this is a very discreet and clean way of doing that. It's also a very cost-effective way of doing that. And we can size this well and the amount of storage in a way that we reduce the overall water purchases from Beaufort to only about an average of 2.4 million gallons per day. Now we need 3.5 million gallons per day, but the water that's stored in the well is going to help offset that additional water purchase. So we're only 2.4 million gallons per day, and then we're just using the water that we store during the winter, but during the summer. We thought we'd give you an example of what this well would look like once built on the town parcel. And this is an example from South Island PSD. This is located just southwest of the Broad Creek's wastewater plant in the Long Cove development area, an aerial view, and what it looks like from the inside. The structure is about 12 to 14 foot tall, looks like a shed. There is a generator that goes with this so that during the storms, long-term power interruptions, the well can still produce water. And then there is a utility pole so that we can communicate and control the well remotely. And this is just a wooden pole that sits in the corner of the parking area. Again, very discreetly in its appearance, very discreet in its appearance. So this town's Greenwood tract parcel is an ideal location for this ASR well due to the proximity to Broad Creek's other infrastructure, and specifically a converted storage tank and the large transmission main that supplies water into that tank. It's a very effective way for us to get water out of the system and into the well, and then also out of the well and back into the system. We don't have to dig up other major roads in order to access the pipeline. We're talking about having some access through the back end of the fire station property. This blue line here is an existing dirt pathway that we would be using, and there would be some pipeline connections going down along the property line onto St. Andrews Commons. We're showing the buffer that the staff had requested to keep the well back from the William Hilton Parkway, and again, we're accessing from the back, so we're complying with the town's the staff's request. There are some existing easements on the parcel. The Broad Creek does have a perpetual easement to use this area for what is in effect minor utility purposes. So while we do need to ask Greenwood for their permission in this, it's part of their restricted covenants. We're really already using the site for minor utility purposes, in that the entire parcel has been used as a spray field for disposing of treated wastewater. And there was actually this particular document shown here releases back part of that parcels for the construction of the fire station in 2014. There are a few other easements on the parcel that have been released through the years that we'll be working with. So basically, our request here today is to, in conclusion, the town's Greenwood Tract parcel is ideal location for this ASR well due to the proximity of the large diameter pipelines that are needed to convey water throughout Broad Creek's distribution system, minimizes the impacts to digging in roadways and other areas. The ASR well is consistent with the minor utility functions already approved by perpetual easement on this parcel, and Broad Creek would seek the town's approval to modify that easement language to include the ASR well operations within the previously granted rights. That is it.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Mike. Well, Nicole, it's my understanding that staff is requesting F&A committee support on this proposal as presented, and that staff engage in writing an agreement given the conditions that you have outlined.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And at what point will it be determined whether it's a lease or a sale?
Well, I think that's up to town council. I think typically the town prefers that we lease property rather than sell, but I believe it is up to town council to decide that.
Okay. So this recommendation, if it were to proceed, would go from this committee to town council?
That's correct. Should you recommend approval to town council or direct staff to work with our legal counsel on agreement, we could present that at your next town council meeting in February for first reading of the agreement.
Okay, thank you. Committee, what are your questions and comments of Mike, Tom, or Nicole?
I think a very thorough presentation, and I'm comfortable to move for consideration a motion instructing staff to work with town council to develop an agreement for either lease or sale to be determined to be submitted to town council for review.
Okay, I think I've heard a motion. Is there a second? And then we'll open up discussion again.
Excuse me, I was just informed that we would like for you all to recommend whether we sell or lease in your motion.
Well, on something like this, I would prefer a lease.
Lease would suit our needs as well.
Say again? Okay, Bill, you made the motion to support the proposal and to write an agreement with the conditions that Nicole outlined in the form of a lease agreement with Broad Creek PSD.
Correct.
Is there a second?
I second.
Glenn, there's a second. Comments, questions? Alex?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all for the presentation here today. Just a couple questions for Greenwood and then one for staff. So I'm making the assumption that at this point, Broad Creek does not have any ASRs operating. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And the sites that you mentioned that are under, I guess, saltwater intrusion attack, once that takes place, are there any plans to I guess, decommission those or offer them up as some other type of use?
If the well ends up going salty, typically per state requirements, it's abandoned based on the ownership of that property, or if it's in a lease, we could move forward, but they would be abandoned.
Okay, so the proprietary on those that you currently have in operation, is the property owned by Greenwood?
I believe the 3 well sites are owned by Broad Creek, but I'm 90% sure of that.
Okay, but not owned by the town?
Correct.
Okay. And the question for staff is, do we have any idea of how many other situations on the island where the town is in ownership of the land and there's a public water service that is leasing from us for this type of unit?
I do not have that information in front of me, but I can get it and have it ready for the town council meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Glenn?
Thank you. I always get confused when I see 3 different water utilities on our one little small community. But as I understand it from this presentation, the water supply is adequate now. But what we're doing is we're anticipating, because of saltwater intrusion, that those resources will not be sufficient in the future, so we're planning for the future. Is that a fair way to present this?
Yes, that's a fair way to present it.
Thank you. I agree that I think I would prefer to have a lease on this. I would be interested in our town lawyer's opinion on that, but I think that makes some sense. Those are my questions, Tom.
Thank you. Nicole and Zendaya, are you clear on the motion?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Then I would call for the vote. All those in favor of the motion as presented by Bill and seconded by Glenn, please indicate by raising your right hand. It is unanimous, Nicole.
Thank you.
Thank you, committee. I have no other new business on the agenda. Is there any other business to come before the committee? If there is none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you.